time I moved in with a 30-yo alcoholic at 19, across the country cause. I had nowhere else to go. When I was 19, I was living the dream traveling the East Coast in my new car and blogging it. Some guy online found my videos and messaged me, which is how I met Steve. Steve came off as sweet and curious, and my 19-yo self fell for it. He flew from Texas to Pennsylvania the second I told him my childhood home went up for sale, and I didn't think much of it. I regret now ranting about how bad my family was to me, and then confiding in him when my mom said I couldn't move her when she found a new place. Well, I had no credit, 2 cats, and was 19, so no one would rent to me, and that's how I ended up living with Steve. Now 1,800 miles from home, no money, and no family, I was stuck in South Texas with a man who immediately laid his hand on me once I got out of Pennsylvania. We stopped at a hotel in Arkansas because I got sick, COVID, and it's still a blur, but we got into an argument where he choked me and left. I woke up to get hotel breakfast with bursted blood vessels in my face. At this point I thought, maybe my friends were right. I will either be killed or sex trafficked. So I looked up all the police stations we passed until we got to our place. Thank God his job started sending him on the road for weeks at a time, oil field, and I got breaks from him cause I was scared and alone and wasn't strong enough yet to fight back. Turns out, he was just an angry alcoholic with head trauma due to football, and was very misogynistic sexist. I started a job to secretly save money and get away from him. I even debated joining the military just to get my life together fast and away from him. Well, my boss at my new job turned out really nice. So nice we started dating. He grew up in Ohio and ended up in Texas because his family moved there, and his girlfriend in Ohio aborted his baby without him knowing because she wanted to get back with her ex-boyfriend. We bonded off the crazy reasons we had for ending up in the desert of America. I stayed with him and his family, slowing getting away from Steve, without Steve knowing. I tried to break it off with Steve, and said we could still live together, but I would treat him like a roommate, paying half the bills and buying my own things and returning his because he had bought me a car and a phone, and I didn't want to rely on him in any way, which is why I got my job. Steve offered to pay me to stay home and take care of him while he was there. I imagined to stop me from working and entrapping me more by not paying and buying new things I wouldn't be able to run away with. Secretly, I was sleeping over at my boss' house, and soon I would even go over while Steve was home for the week. I thought Steve would kill me if I left because he would fall asleep drunk with a gun when I went out with friends. He would even lock me out of the house. Even though the friends I was with was involved with gangs, drugs, and maybe prostitution. I know, what was I doing there? Anything felt better than being with Steve, I think. Steve started to realize that, and I didn't care. I decided to fly back home to visit now that I had some money because I was homesick, and it was fair week. I thought it'd be a nice break to take my little brother to the fair and hang out in my small town. I told Steve a day prior to my flight, and he insisted that I was really going to cheat, so he's going to go too. We got into a big argument, and meanwhile my mom texted,
"Click here to watch the full story."
"I can't get you from the airport," which he picked up, and used that as another reason he should go so he could get me a rental car. So he ended up coming, forcing me to pay for a hotel, and trying to guilt-trip me into going to the cities without my family so he could eat new food. My boss was confused why this toxic alcoholic went with me if I hated him so much, and I couldn't explain this situation I was in. I just knew I had to cut this off and fast, because me and my boss were falling in love with each other. When I got back, I told my boss everything. We cried together and swore we would be together, alive and healthy no matter what. I just had to get away. It became real easy when my cousin Danny got into a fatal accident. This was a month after our trip, and Steve got mad at me because the house wasn't up to his standards. So when I went home from work early to bawl my eyes out and call my family, I was surprised to see a random car in the driveway and a text that said, "I hired a maid for a day because you can't do simple things I repeatedly ask for." So this was my demeaning punishment on what felt like the worst day of my whole life. Steve came home to argue, and I stayed silent. He finally asked if something was up, and I told him about the phone call I got. He asked if he had met him, and I reminded him of the fire was had with Danny the last day of my trip home, to which he replied, "Oh well, I didn't really care for him anyways." I could tell he didn't care for me. That week I had waited for him to go back on the road and pack up all my stuff. My boss had got a place for us to live together. But Steve's work trip was put off, and I decided I didn't care anymore if it hurt me, killed me, whatever. So while I was at work, I texted him that I was leaving. I was too nervous to tell him in person, but it had to be done. He showed up at my job, or attempted to at first. He walked into the shop next to mine, screaming into the restaurant. I worked at the smoke shop, demanding that I come out and talk to him. The restaurant called the police, and he found his way over to my store. It was really a blur because I was so scared. He took the phone from me and sat in his truck. I was thankfully smart enough to bring my old phone just in case, where I saw him calling contacts I guess he didn't recognize, and sending messages to people. He found out then that my boss was more than just my boss by reading our messages. The best part of the whole year was him walking into the store with the phone, sobbing. He kept asking why, and I unknowingly was smiling. He went behind the counter in a rage and grabbed my car keys and left with the car. Later, a mutual friend got his truck, and his wife came in asking what was happening. All she knew was that I cheated, and he was breaking up with me. When I told her my side, she confided in me with stories about how, when Steve was on the road with her husband, he would go to strip clubs and bring girls. Back to the hotel. LOL. Steve went back on the road the next day, and I packed all my stuff and Kat's. My boss drove me around and helped me get to work. The week of my cousin's funeral is for a whole other story. It took weeks for Steve to stop stalking me at work and dropping off hundreds of dollars and begging me to get back with him. It took me a couple months to get a car together, a working phone, and enough time to focus on my job and getting more hours. I only had a hard time trying not to, somehow, feel guilty for everything that happened. Guilty my boss had to see and deal with my drama. Guilty that I moved to Texas and gave this guy a hard time, as if he didn't deserve it. My boss and I had worked very hard for 3 years and saved up a lot of money. We now are moved into his downtown with his family in Ohio. I haven't had any contact with Steve after his stalking and no longer feel anything towards that situation. I was very scared, then feeling guilty, and then very angry I was. Put through that. But now living back up north with my boss, who is really the love of my life, it's hard for me to care about anything else. It was all a great lesson on how sometimes bad people know they're bad, so they put up a front to seem very sweet and nice until they can really get their claws in you. I learned to feel more sympathetic towards people in poor situations because you don't know what had happened for them to end up there. I lean to always be prepared because big traumatic life changes can happen in a 2-minute phone call or text message. This also taught me to be more grateful. I learned that my mother fall into the bad people category, more like evil, and I will strive to be the best person and mother I can be when I have children of my own. Thank you for reading. I'll also take my time to shout out the restaurant who called the police. I had forgot my pasta at pickup because of the whole ordeal, and a worker had brought my pasta over very angry. Because she read my name on the ticket and asked, Julia. As in, the Julia some drunk guy was screaming in our store. And I started crying, and she hugs me realizing I didn't want that to happen lol, but she was sweet.